I want you to start this deep dive by just picturing a Viking in your head.
Yeah, just close your eyes for a second and see what pops up.
Right. And I bet the image that just popped into your head is almost certainly, a dragon ship crashing through these freezing gray
Oh,
waves.
totally. The classic North Sea imagery.
Exactly. You are probably visualizing raiders standing on a wooden deck, looking west toward the coast of England, or maybe south toward France.
Getting ready to strike a wealthy coastal monastery, right?
Yeah, because it is the defining cultural memory of the era.
It really is. I mean, the Western raid is basically how the Viking Age was introduced to our modern imagination.
Right. Largely because those Western European victims were the ones writing the histories we rely on most.
Exactly. The monks wrote the books, so we get the monks' perspective.
But if you are only picturing those Western Ocean raids, you are literally only looking at half the map.
Barely half, honestly.
Right. So today, we are turning our gaze in the complete opposite direction. We are looking at the other Viking world.
The one that pointed east.
Yes, and we're doing this because this eastern expansion, it didn't rely on the open ocean at all.
Not even a little bit. It relied on this grinding, brutal overland network that, well, it fundamentally altered global history.
It's wild. And the eastern trajectory is arguably a much more complex logistical feat than the western raids.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, our mission for this deep dive is to really explore these Eastern Vikings.
The people who came to be known as the Rus.
Right, the Rus. We're going to track their massive supply chains down these treacherous river roads.
We'll examine their transition from basically nomadic traders to the founders of the states that would eventually become Russia and Ukraine.
And we're going to follow their route all the way down to Constantinople.
Which is just a staggering distance.
It really is. We'll see how they embedded themselves into the Byzantine Empire as the legendary Varangian Guard.
So consider the scale we are working with today. I mean, we are tracing a route that connects the freezing rocky shores of the Baltic Sea all the way to the borders of the Islamic Caliphate.
And the Byzantine Empire. It's just a massive geographic footprint.
It is. And the overarching theme you'll notice here is this grand paradox, really.
Yeah, these were fierce northern warriors who conquered territories and built incredible economic networks.
Right, but their ultimate historical destiny was to just, well, vanish completely into the very empires they helped construct.
It's the grand absorption, yeah. But to understand why the Viking world split into two completely different hemispheres like this, we basically have to look at the geographical realities of Scandinavia.
Because geography dictates the economics, right?
Exactly. Think about it. If you lived in Norway or Denmark, your natural orientation was the Atlantic. You looked west and south.
You're facing the open ocean.
Right. But if you were a Viking living in Sweden, the geography forced a totally different perspective. You faced the Baltic Sea.
And beyond that was just the immense, heavily forested, largely roadless interior of Eastern Europe.
Right. So a coastal raid like we see in the West that relies entirely on the element of surprise.
You use the ocean as a highway, you strike a target, and boom, you use that same ocean to vanish before a local army can even put their boots on.
Exactly. But if you are a Swedish Viking staring at this massive continental landmass of Eastern Europe, that strategy is completely useless.
Because you can't exactly sail a long ship across a grassy steppe.
Or through a dense pine forest, no. So that geographical barrier forced a completely different operational strategy.
They had to adapt.
They did. The Swedes had to become the ultimate middlemen. To penetrate that vast interior, they had to control the only viable highways that actually existed in that wilderness.
Which were the continent's massive river systems.
Right. And the motivation to push into that punishing environment was purely economic.
It's always about the money, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The eastern forests were rich in commodities that the southern empires desperately craved.
Right, we're talking about luxury goods here. The northern forest held just this endless supply of high-quality furs.
Like sable, marten, fox.
Yeah, which were incredibly valuable status symbols in those warmer southern climates.
Plus you had amber from the Baltic coast, massive quantities of wax and honey.
And, well, as we explored deeply in our 7th deep dive, a massive human trafficking network.
Right, the slave trade. The Rus captured and enslaved people, primarily from the surrounding Slavic populations, to transport south.
Yeah, so that was the export economy, right? Furs, amber, and enslaved people.
But the mechanics of this whole trade network, it really only makes sense when you look at what was flowing north in exchange.
The ultimate prize.
Exactly. The prize pulling the Rus down those rivers was silver. specifically Islamic silver coins known as the dirhams.
Minted in the Caliphate.
Right, and this obsession with silver, it mirrors the Western Vikings completely.
Oh, totally. Think back to our deep dive on Bjorn Ironside's Mediterranean raid. The Vikings always pushed toward the wealth of the south.
Yeah, but Bjorn took a fleet of ships through the Strait of Gibraltar. The Swedes were trying to access that exact same global wealth by dragging their goods thousands of miles over land.
Which is just a staggering amount of effort. And the scale of that silver influx, it's actually still visible today, isn't it?
It is. Archaeologists working in Scandinavia right now, particularly on the Swedish island of Gotland, they continually unearth massive hoards of Islamic silver coins.
Wow. Like, how massive are we talking?
We are talking about tens of thousands of dirhams buried in the dirt.
That is insane.
It really proves that the Eastern Route wasn't just, a series of isolated raids. It was a highly organized, relentless economic engine.
Exchanging northern resources for southern currency.
Exactly. But to get that silver, they needed a transport system that could handle thousands of miles of really hostile territory.
And the mechanics of that journey, that actually gives us the very name of the people we were discussing today.
Right, the Rus.
Yeah, we call them the Rus. And the leading linguistic theory traces that term back to an Old Norse root word for rowing men.
Likely filtered through the Finnish language, yeah.
It is a strictly functional title, which I love.
It totally strips away all the mythology of the Viking warrior.
The horned helmets and all that.
Right, and it leaves you with the brutal physical reality of their daily lives. They rowed.
The eastern expansion was literally built on the shoulders of men hauling oars.
Yeah, and they relied on two primary river highways. The first was the Volga River.
Which is this massive artery that allowed them to push really deep into the east.
Yeah, eventually spilling out into the Caspian Sea, which gave them direct access to the merchants of the Islamic Caliphate.
Right. And then the second major highway was the Dnieper River.
And that route flowed almost directly south, emptying right into the Black Sea.
And across the Black Sea sat Constantinople.
Exactly. But, calling these rivers highways, it makes them sound smooth and continuous.
Like an interstate or something.
Right, but the reality of navigating them sounds like an absolute nightmare, because the rivers didn't neatly connect.
Not at all. The river systems of Eastern Europe are highly fragmented. So when a navigable waterway ended,
or when they needed to jump the watershed from a north-flowing river to a south-flowing one,
they had to execute a portage.
Yeah. They literally had to take their ships out of the water and drag them over dry land.
I mean, we've covered Viking ship technology before, and we know those clinker-built longships were incredibly flexible.
And relatively shallow drafted, yeah.
But adapting a ship designed for the Baltic Sea to be dragged through a muddy, rocky forest, that requires a staggering amount of labor.
Oh, it's brutal. You have to lay down felled trees to use as wooden rollers.
You have to secure lines and physically haul a vessel weighing several tons.
Along with all its cargo.
Right, across miles of punishing terrain.
And the crazy part is the portages weren't even the most dangerous part of the journey.
Wait, really? What was worse than dragging a boat through a forest?
Well, the Dnieper route featured this geographic bottleneck that became legendary for its lethality.
Oh, the rapids.
Yes. The river dropped violently over a series of jagged granite outcroppings, creating this stretch of churning, impassable rapids and cataracts.
And attempting to sail through them would just instantly tear the hull off a ship.
Exactly. So the rowing men, they have to stop. They have to beach their ships, unload hundreds of pounds of timber, furs, and, captive humans.
And manually carry everything along the riverbanks to bypass the white water.
Which is a logistical vulnerability of the highest order.
I can't even imagine. Carrying your body weight in trade goods through the mud, exhausted from weeks of rowing.
Knowing that you are completely exposed.
Because you're exposed in territory controlled by people who built their entire tactical doctrine around exploiting that exact vulnerability.
Right. The grasslands surrounding these rivers were the domain of steppe nomads, most notably the Pechenegs.
And these were highly mobile, fiercely effective horse archers.
The Pechenegs didn't even need to hunt the rest down. They just had to wait at the cataracts.
They knew exactly where the Vikings had to leave the water.
And they knew the Vikings would be moving slowly, burdened by all that cargo.
So the nomads would just hide in the tall grass, wait for the portage to begin, and launch these devastating hit-and-run ambushes.
And we actually possess a granular contemporary account of this exact dynamic, which is so rare for this period.
Oh, from the Byzantine emperor, right.
Yeah, in the 10th century, Emperor Constantine VII wrote a geopolitical manual called De Administrando Imperio.
Catchy title.
Very. But in it, he documents the annual journey of the Rus down the Dnieper in astonishing detail.
Like the emperor of the most sophisticated state in the Mediterranean sat down and recorded the specific Norse and Slavic names of each individual rapid.
Yeah, detailing exactly how the Rus had to form defensive perimeters with their weapons drawn, while the rest of their crew desperately dragged the ships through the shallows.
That is just a phenomenal detail. A Byzantine emperor taking tactical notes on the muddy logistics of northern traders.
It proves just how critical this supply chain was to the global economy.
And honestly, this grueling reality is exactly what the Netflix series Vikings, Valhalla, captures so effectively.
Oh, they did a brilliant job with that.
They really did. They send their characters east, forcing them down these river roads,
Yeah.
and you see the sheer exhaustion of the portage.
You see the constant nerve-wracking threat of the horse archers and the tree line.
It completely redefines what it meant to be a Viking. It wasn't just about standing in a shield wall on a green field in Wessex.
No, it was an endless endurance test in a hostile wilderness.
Right. And survival in that environment required a hyper-vigilant, militarized culture.
Absolutely. And, we don't have to rely purely on Byzantine military manuals to understand the social reality of these river camps.
Because we possess one of the most remarkable eyewitness accounts of the Middle Ages.
Written by an outsider who literally walked right into one of their settlements.
Right, Ahmad ibn Fadlan.
Yes. In the year 922, this Arab diplomat was sent on an embassy from the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, traveling deep into the Eurasian steppe.
And along the Volga River, he encounters this massive camp of Rus traders.
And to really appreciate the impact of this text, you have to contextualize the observer here.
Right, because in 922, Baghdad is arguably the intellectual and cultural capital of the world.
Oh, easily. It is a city of libraries, hospitals, sophisticated urban planning, complex theology.
And Ibn Fadlan is a highly educated representative of an Islamic culture that places immense religious and social importance on ritual purity.
Cleanliness, intellectual refinement.
And suddenly, he finds himself face-to-face with these heavily armed, deeply superstitious northern frontiersmen.
It's a massive culture crash.
I always picture it as like a modern high society cultural anthropologist suddenly being airdropped into a lawless, off-the-grid mercenary camp.
That's a perfect analogy. He is simultaneously mesmerized and completely repulsed by them.
He starts with their physical appearance, and you can tell he is genuinely intimidated.
Yeah, he describes them as being tall as date palms.
He notes that they have blonde hair and ruddy complexions, but what really catches his eye is the ink.
The tattoos. He says every single man is covered in dark green markings, stretching from the tips of their fingers all the way up their necks.
Which just paints such a vivid, terrifying picture.
It does. He also observes this constant undercurrent of violence in their society.
Right. He writes that no Rus man ever leaves his weapons behind.
Whether they are trading, eating, or sleeping, they are equipped with a broadaxe, a sword, and a dagger.
Because the threat of sudden violence, whether from nomads or just from each other, was basically the baseline condition of their existence.
Yeah. But his admiration abruptly ends when he observes their morning routine.
Oh, this part is famously gross.
It really is. So Islamic law dictates specific hygienic methods for ritual washing, usually involving clean flowing water.
Right. And Ibn Fadlan watches the Rus wake up, and a single slave girl brings over a large bowl of water.
And the chieftain washes his face, combs his hair into the water, blows his nose, and spits into the bowl.
And then, this is the worst part, that exact same bowl is passed to the next man.
Who does the exact same thing.
Until every warrior in the camp has used the communal, filthy water.
Ibn Fadlan's reaction is visceral. He literally calls them the filthiest of all Allah's creatures.
He compares them to wild donkeys.
He does.
But this presents a really fascinating paradox for historians, doesn't it?
How so?
Because if we look at the surviving texts from Christian England, the monks there complain that the Vikings are obsessed with their appearance.
Oh, right. The English lament that the Vikings are seducing noblewomen because they insist on bathing every single Saturday.
And changing their clothes regularly and meticulously combing their hair.
The English consider them overly groomed peacocks.
Exactly. So it is a perfect lesson in historical relativity.
Yeah, to an English monk living in a damp, smoke-filled hall, the Viking habit of weekly bathing seemed luxurious and, well, fastidious.
But to a cultured Muslim diplomat accustomed to the backhouses and running water of Baghdad, the Viking communal wash basin was an absolute abomination.
It just shows that historical truth is often deeply colored by the baseline expectations of the observer.
Definitely. But Ibn Fadlan's cultural shock wasn't limited to just hygiene.
No, it wasn't. He happened to be present in the camp when a prominent Rus chieftain died.
And because of that wild coincidence, we have a staggeringly detailed, harrowing account of a Viking ship funeral.
It is arguably the most comprehensive textual evidence we possess regarding Norse funerary practices.
It's incredible. Ibn Fadlan stays for days, documenting the sheer industrial scale of this ritual.
They pull a massive ship onto the riverbank, right, propping it up on wooden scaffolding.
They dress the deceased chieftain in magnificent, expensive garments. Byzantine brocades, gold buttons.
And they place him in a pavilion constructed right there on the deck.
They surround the body with weapons, massive amounts of food, and intoxicating drink.
And then the ritual sacrifice begins.
Yeah, they slaughter dogs, horses, cows, and roosters, just throwing the carcasses onto the ship.
But the wealth being destroyed in this ritual isn't just animal livestock.
No. Ibn Fadlan details the systematic sacrifice of a human being.
A slave girl from the camp is chosen to accompany the chieftain into the afterlife.
And the sociology of this moment is just grim.
The text suggests she volunteered, but, I mean, within the oppressive, coercive hierarchy of an enslavement camp, consent is a completely meaningless concept.
Totally meaningless. Over several days, she is subjected to intense psychological conditioning and intoxication.
Ibn Fadlan notes she is handed over to an older, authoritative woman in the camp,
whom the Rus actually call the Angel of Death.
Yeah, and she is the one who orchestrates the final execution.
The climax of the account is incredibly difficult to read. The girl is brought onto the ship, and inside the pavilion, next to the dead chieftain, she is murdered by the Angel of Death and several men in a chaotic, brutal sequence.
And immediately afterward, the closest relative of the chieftain takes a torch, strips naked, and sets the entire ship ablaze.
They burn the massive vessel, the wealth, the animals, and the bodies down to ash.
And then they construct a massive earthen mound over the remains.
It's just, wow. The sheer expenditure of resources, burning a highly valuable ship, livestock, textiles, and human capital, it was a massive display of economic power.
And spiritual belief, yeah. It vividly illustrates the extreme brutality that ran parallel to their trade operations.
But, the trajectory of these river camps eventually hit a tipping point.
Right, because you can only live out of boats and temporary mud camps for so long.
Wintering in hostile territory requires infrastructure. Protecting your trade routes from those Pecheneg nomads requires fortified strongholds.
So the Rus began to transition. They underwent a profound evolution.
They shifted from being basically nomadic extractors of wealth to permanent state builders.
Exactly. To protect the river roads, they established fortified trading centers, called gorod in the local Slavic language, at key strategic junctions.
Which naturally leads us to the grand absorption pattern of the Viking Age.
A pattern we've definitely seen before.
Right. In episode 11, we talked about Rollo. He took a Viking army, settled in northern France, and within a few generations, his descendants weren't Vikings anymore.
They were the French-speaking Normans who built castles and rode destriers.
Exactly. And that exact same cultural metamorphosis happened in the East.
The narrative of this Eastern state building is preserved in a later text called the Russian Primary Chronicle.
And according to the Chronicle, in the late 9th century, the local Slavic and Finnic tribes were constantly warring among themselves.
So supposedly, they invited a Scandinavian leader named Rurik to come and establish order.
Which is convenient. But Rurik sets up his seat of power in the northern city of Novgorod, establishing the Rurikid dynasty.
And this dynasty is not a minor historical blip.
No, the descendants of Rurik would rule this massive territory for 700 years, ultimately evolving into the Tsardom of Russia.
Right. And as their economic engine grew, the center of gravity shifted south, further down the Dnieper River, to a city that is constantly in our modern news cycle.
Kiev, or modern-day Kiev.
Yes. This created the political entity historians call the Kievan Rus, which is the foundational ancestor state of modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus.
And the story of Rurik brings us to one of the most intense, heavily politicized controversies in medieval history.
Oh, the Normanist debate.
Yes. For centuries, scholars have fiercely argued over who actually founded the Russian state.
Right. Was it the Scandinavian Norsemen, the Normans, who imposed order and statecraft from the top down?
Or did the immense indigenous Slavic population develop these complex political structures entirely on their own?
The early Soviet historians, for example, strongly rejected the idea that their state was founded by Germanic outsiders.
But modern archaeology provides a much clearer, more nuanced picture than nationalist history usually allows.
It does. The archaeological evidence points to a synthesis. It proves that Scandinavian elites played a major, undeniable role in the early formation of these states.
Because we find chamber graves containing Norse weapons, Thor's hammer amulets, and Scandinavian jewelry right alongside early Slavic settlements.
Right. The Rus were the heavily armed muscle, the directors of long-distance trade, and the early ruling class.
But, and this is the key to the absorption pattern, they were a tiny minority operating within a massive demographic sea of Slavic people.
Exactly. When a small military elite settles among a massive local population, assimilation is inevitable.
The Norse rulers needed the local Slavic populations to farm the land, provision the trade fleets, and serve in their militias.
So they quickly began intermarrying with the local nobility.
And within just 2 or 3 generations, the rulers of the Kievan Rus had Slavic names. They spoke the Slavic language, they adopted the local dress.
Both the Norse foundation and the vast indigenous Slavic agency are historically true.
Right. The Scandinavians built the framework of the house, but they vanished into the walls.
That's a great way to put it. A perfect example of this cultural fusion is Yaroslav the Wise,
Who ruled Kiev in the 11th century.
Yes. By blood, he is a descendant of those heavily tattooed, boat-dragging Vikings. But by culture, he is a sophisticated, Slavicized monarch ruling a massive Eastern European state.
And his court in Kiev is the exact place where Harald Hardrada, the Varangian we already met in episode 14, sought refuge after fleeing his homeland.
Hardrada really serves as a brilliant living bridge between the Western and Eastern Viking worlds.
Yeah, a Norwegian prince loses a battle at home, and his first instinct isn't to sail to England or France.
No, he travels deep into Eastern Europe to a court founded by Swedes but populated by Slavs.
It just demonstrates how deeply interconnected the geopolitics of the 11th century truly were.
It really does. But, for a man with the ambition of Harald Hardrada, Kiev was just a waypoint.
Right. Yaroslavl city was rich, but it wasn't the absolute pinnacle of global wealth.
No, the ultimate prize lay at the very end of the Dnieper River Road across the Black Sea.
The city of Constantinople.
Yes. The Norse called it Miklagard, which translates simply to the Great City.
And we touched on this in our Hardrada deep dive, but we need to pause and really imagine what this city looked like to a northerner stepping off a muddy riverboat.
Oh, it must have been mind-blowing. I mean, a Viking from a major Scandinavian settlement like Birka or Hedeby was used to seeing maybe a few thousand people living in timber longhouses with thatched roofs.
Right, so arriving in Constantinople would have been a profoundly alien experience.
It was an urban environment on a scale completely absent from Northern Europe since the fall of the Western Roman Empire.
Constantinople housed roughly 500,000 people.
500,000. It was protected by the Theodosian walls, this massive triple-layered ring of ancient stone fortifications.
It featured running water delivered by monumental aqueducts, massive public cisterns, subterranean palaces, and bustling cosmopolitan markets.
Overflowing with silk, spices, and glass.
And dominating the skyline was the Hagia Sophia,
the largest, most structurally complex church in the Christian world.
with a dome that seemed suspended from heaven by a golden chain. To a Viking, it must have looked like a city built by gods.
And naturally, the Rus interacted with this wealth in the two distinct ways Vikings always interacted with wealth.
Trade and violence.
Exactly. They established lucrative trade treaties to acquire it, and when that wasn't fast enough, they brought fleets across the Black Sea and tried to take it by force.
The Rus launched several massive sieges against Constantinople over the centuries. They would just swarm the Bosphorus Strait with thousands of their small river ships.
But the Byzantine Empire was not an undefended English monastery.
No, they possessed sophisticated military engineering. Most notably, a weapon known as Greek fire.
Which was the ultimate terror weapon of the medieval world.
It was an incendiary liquid, a sort of ancient napalm, that the Byzantines pumped through bronze siphons mounted on the prows of their war galleys.
And it ignited on contact with the air.
And the craziest part is it continued to burn even while floating on top of the water.
For a fleet of Vikings packed into wooden boats, Greek fire was a tactical nightmare. It incinerated entire armadas.
So the Byzantines successfully defended their capital, but they were deeply pragmatic strategists.
Very much so. They recognized that these terrifying, heavily armed northerners who kept throwing themselves at the walls possessed a martial ferocity that was incredibly valuable.
And the Byzantine emperors had a persistent, critical vulnerability within their own borders.
Right. Given the immense wealth and power we are discussing, the biggest danger to an emperor probably wasn't an invading army on the horizon.
It was his own generals and politicians inside the walls, right?
Precisely. The Byzantine system of succession was notoriously unstable. It wasn't strictly hereditary. Power often went to whoever could command the military and hold the palace.
So the imperial court was basically a labyrinth of factions, aristocratic plotting, and military coups.
Yeah, if you are the emperor, you cannot trust the elite palace guard, because those guards are recruited from local Byzantine families.
They have local loyalties. They owe favors to the generals plotting against you.
It's the classic dictator's dilemma. Your bodyguards are the only people who can protect you from an assassin, but they're also the only people perfectly positioned to assassinate you.
Right. So in the late 10th century, specifically around the year 988 under Emperor Basil II, the Byzantine state formalized a brilliant structural solution.
They created the Varangian Guard.
And the term Varangian shares an etymological root related to a pledge, a vow, or a sworn oath.
The emperor essentially hires an outside security firm.
He takes these Norsemen who have rowed down the rivers, men who don't speak Greek, who don't have Byzantine cousins.
And who have absolutely zero stake in the theological debates or political squabbles of Constantinople.
And he makes them his personal elite shock troops.
It is a purely transactional relationship stripped of political ideology.
The emperor buys their absolute loyalty with massive amounts of silver and silk.
And in exchange, the Varangians provide a heavily armored, politically neutral wall of muscle around the throne.
They couldn't be easily bribed by a local politician because they had no interest in Byzantine politics.
Right. Their goal was to accumulate wealth and eventually return north.
And they brought their northern battlefield mechanics with them. The Varangians became instantly recognizable because they carried massive two-handed battle axes.
These weren't ceremonial weapons. They were long-hafted, broad-bladed axes designed to cleave through heavy cavalry armor.
Or shatter a shield wall. The Byzantines frequently deployed them as shock troops to break deadlocks in critical battles, but they also stationed them intimately close to the emperor.
The visual contrast is just stunning. You have the ancient, perfumed, hyper-sophisticated marble halls of the Great Palace, filled with eunuchs and silk-robed aristocrats.
And standing right in the corners of these rooms are massive, tattooed Norsemen leaning on 5-foot executioner's axes.
Vikings. Valhalla visualizes this collision of cultures wonderfully.
It really does. It highlights the sheer adaptability of the Norsemen.
Yeah, the same men who could navigate the freezing rapids of the Dnieper and survive the mud of a portage could integrate themselves into the deadly, velvet-draped political theater of the Roman Empire's eastern survivors.
Which brings us to an incredible piece of physical evidence. We spent this entire deep dive discussing massive geopolitical shifts, the foundations of the Russian state, and elite imperial guard units.
But my absolute favorite artifact from this entire era is a deeply human, almost comical archaeological footnote.
It really grounds this epic history in a very relatable reality.
It is a perfect encapsulation of the human element operating within these massive historical machines.
Right. So if you walk into the Hagia Sophia today, this colossal, sacred architectural wonder in modern Istanbul, and you go up to the southern gallery, you can find something scratched directly into the ancient marble balustrade.
It's Norse runic graffiti.
Someone took a blade and carved runes into the holiest building in the Eastern Christian world.
And translating the runes reveals a message that is remarkably mundane.
Scratched into the marble by a Varangian guardsman over 1,000 years ago, it translates roughly to, Halfdan was here.
It just strips away the mythic aura of the Varangian Guard and leaves you with a bored soldier.
I picture this towering warrior, armed with his two-handed axe, standing guard in the gallery during what must have been an unimaginably long, incense-filled, incredibly tedious Byzantine church ceremony.
He's standing there for hours listening to chanting in a language he barely understands.
He gets bored, pulls out a knife, and acts exactly like a teenager, scratching his initials into a wooden desk at the back of a classroom. Halfdan was here.
The humor of the act shouldn't overshadow its historical significance, though.
Oh, definitely not. If we synthesize everything we've analyzed today, That tiny, cheeky carving is the ultimate proof of the staggering reach of the Viking world.
The geographic span is almost difficult to comprehend.
It really is.
I mean, we have concrete archaeological evidence of Vikings building timber halls in Newfoundland, Canada, on the edge of North America in the west.
And at the exact same time, we have their handwritten graffiti in the Hagia Sophia in the east.
And their presence documented in the markets of Baghdad.
They physically touched the extreme edges of the known world, operating as raiders, traders, and elite soldiers across thousands of miles.
So as we wrap up our exploration of the Eastern Vikings, what are the core lessons we need to carry forward?
I think there are three critical takeaways here. First, we must completely discard the idea that the Viking Age was solely a phenomenon of the Atlantic Ocean.
Right. The Eastern expansion proved they could master continental interiors and construct massive overland supply chains.
Second, it shifts our understanding of their historical function. They were not just destructive raiders, they were highly effective state builders.
The river roads were the economic arteries that birthed the complex political map of Eastern Europe.
And the third takeaway,
The profound reality of the absorption pattern. The Vikings were unparalleled in their ability to project force and establish power, but their ultimate historical destiny was assimilation.
they poured their genetic legacy, their administrative frameworks, and their military tactics into the foundations of other nations.
In Normandy, in England, and in the Kievan Rus.
And then they were completely absorbed by the immense populations they conquered. They shaped the medieval world by becoming someone else entirely.
It is a fascinating legacy of cultural adaptation.
But our journey through the Viking Age isn't over. On our next deep dive, we are crossing all the way back west, leaving the forests of the Rus for the green island of Ireland.
Oh, that's going to be a good one.
We will explore the violent founding of Dublin, which rapidly became one of the most lucrative Viking slave trading hubs in the entire world.
We'll examine the complex, centuries-long entanglement of Norse and Irish cultures.
And it all culminates in the legendary Battle of Clontarf in 1014. The battle where the Irish High King Brian Boru won the greatest victory of his life, but lost his life in the exact same hour. I highly encourage you to follow along for that one.
Moving from the Byzantine Empire to the bogs of Ireland offers a completely different landscape, but you will see the exact same underlying themes of violent conquest, economic opportunism, and inevitable cultural synthesis.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over on your own. We've seen that the Vikings were incredibly effective at using violence and trade to establish dominant power structures all over the map.
But if they were so militarily superior, why do you think their ultimate historical fate in almost every single location was to fade away and be absorbed?
What does it tell you about the difference between the immediate power of a sword and the slow, grinding endurance of a culture?
History rarely leaves a clean, straight line. It leaves a murky, heavily blended landscape.
And maybe, for the Vikings, vanishing into the fabric of Europe was actually their most permanent victory.